Hi, I'm Tony Jackson, and this is part 3 of 3 videos where I cover the final and the most vital 2 of the 12 pieces of the puzzle that were absolutely essential when I eliminated my type 2 diabetes in 2016 and 2017, and I lost 120 pounds while I was doing it. I'll also be talking about the 3 game changers which finally pulled it all together for me. They gave me the transition between all the research I'd been doing and a solid action plan that I could execute. Now, in my earlier videos, part 1 and part 2, I covered the first 10 pieces of the puzzle. Out of them, it became clear that the diet recommended by the medical world was actually unhealthy, that type 2 diabetes guidelines were not reliable, and I needed to aim lower than the doctor suggested, that the key to reducing blood sugar and managing diabetes and losing weight was to focus on eliminating insulin resistance, and that for people with insulin resistance, which is every type 2 diabetic, frequent eating actually contributed to insulin resistance because it floods our systems with insulin 24/7. And now we hit the 2 pieces that changed everything. So, pieces of the puzzle, piece number 11. Whoa, someone is deliberately causing diabetes reversals and they can prove it. Okay, this one was huge. For 50 years, the medical profession had said type 2 diabetes cannot be cured, cannot be reversed, it's chronic and progressive. All you can do is slow its progress down and manage the blood sugar levels to keep them out of the danger zone. But even if you do that, they said, the condition will get worse over time, and if you don't need meds yet, you will. Then, in 2011 and 2012, a UK professor called Roy Taylor pulled together a group of type 2 diabetics and put them through an 8-week program that genuinely reversed their diabetes. Wow, that changed everything. Well, almost everything. I was really excited because he had proven the principle. It could be reversed, but the small print made it unrealistic for me. First, he only invited people who were newly diagnosed, and later he ran other studies and concluded that his specific program worked best with people who had not been diabetic for many years. Well, that was no good for me. Even though I'd actually only been diagnosed for a few years at the time, I knew that my unusual low glycemic diet had actually fooled the numbers. I knew that I'd had severe insulin resistance for 30 plus years, and I knew that it had gotten worse every year for 30 years. How did I know that? I actually have a visual indication of it that I talk about in a case study. But I'd been classed as morbidly obese for 30 years. Then a showstopper for me. His program was to put these people on a very aggressive calorie-reduced diet. He calls it vigorous. I call it awful. 600 calories a day liquid diet for 8 weeks, 200 calories of vegetables. And in fact, these days, he puts you on that diet for 12 weeks, not 8. It was no surprise to learn that one of his filters to qualify to get onto his study group was to make sure the folk in his study were mentally prepared and mentally strong. But again, this was no good for me because every calorie-controlled diet I tried for 30 years had failed because I was cold, miserable and hungry all the time, and all the weight flooded back afterwards. So why would I believe an even more aggressive calorie-restricted diet would be any different? And in fact, it seems that time has proved my concern right. His people did have a tendency to gain the weight back that they'd lost, and the diabetes did return if they did. So, in fact, in the latest incarnation of his program that I've seen, he's added several weeks after the diet ends to help transition people back to real food in smaller quantities, and he also now adds an 18-month period of monitoring and diet and exercise intervention as necessary to try to keep people from regaining the lost weight. So The great news was I now knew it was possible to reverse diabetes. My goal was no longer how to improve it. My goal was to get rid of it. But I had to find a way that would do it, that did not demand starvation level diets, did not cause hunger, did not set me up for failure, did not set me up to regain all that weight. And it had to work with someone who'd been morbidly obese and had demonstrated insulin resistance for more than 30 years. Okay, next piece of the puzzle, part 12 here. The focus shifts to being 100% aimed at reducing body fat. Weight loss just becomes one of many side effects when you think this way. So, along with the awareness that type 2 diabetes could be reversed, this next piece of the puzzle actually was a turning point for me, even though it's just a mind shift. Professor Taylor said the key to his method was to lose weight because some of the fat that was lost was going to be from the liver. And it was his claim that fatty livers were at the heart of insulin resistance. And at that point, when I read that, something in my brain went ka-ching, because it opened my eyes to the awareness that the real key wasn't to lose weight, it was to lose fat. Now, sure, if you lost fat, you would also lose weight. But maybe there were fat loss strategies that put all the focus on this one specific outcome, fat loss, without being distracted by all the baggage that comes when you start thinking about weight loss. I mean, how do you go about just losing fat specifically? So that now became the focal point of my search, and that led me to the 3 game changers. And it also immediately posed a problem, because fat loss is a problem for somebody with insulin resistance. What I learned was that when a healthy body doesn't have enough glucose in the system to provide fuel for the body, and the brain, by the way, when it doesn't have enough glucose, it is able to burn fat for fuel. It's like switching a car from one fuel source to another. In fact, our bodies were designed specifically to do this. In fact, having fat reserves was a brilliant solution to the reality that there would be times that we might go for hours, even days, without being able to find food. I mean, basically nature, or God if you prefer to think that way, built us an alternative fuel source for when the hunting and the foraging weren't going well. So, there was the simple key to fat loss. Burn fat as fuel rather than burning glucose. But there's a huge problem with that simple solution if you're insulin resistant, because insulin does a few things very well. One of them is it helps store some of the food that you eat as fat. It's one of the roles of insulin. But another is when insulin is present in your system, it stops you from burning your fat. If you think about it, it makes sense. As long as you have insulin in your system, in a healthy body, that means you've got glucose in your system, and therefore there's no need to burn fat because your glucose fuel tank is full. But when you're insulin resistant, and when your system is swimming in insulin 24/7, that insulin blocks you from burning fat. I mean, basically, insulin makes you fat and insulin keeps you fat. So, I had to find something that would lower the insulin in my system. I needed to drain my system of insulin and then do everything I could to keep the insulin released by my pancreas as little as possible, and still have it in my system, but for as short a time as possible while it processed the glucose it had to. That led me to research anything and everything I could about burning fat and the role of insulin. And that led me to 3 game changers. Okay, the first game changer was just the awareness I mentioned earlier, that the awareness that our bodies were actually designed to be able to switch fuel tanks from glucose to fat and back again. But what was interesting was that as a 62-year-old at that time, I'd probably never ever activated my reserve fuel tank. When you think about it, like most people in the Western world, I'd always been able to eat when I was hungry. I could put glucose in my system anytime I wanted, so fat burning was just never needed. So my body might actually not be very good at it to begin with, but it was something that's built into all of us. The second game changer, I looked for any group of people who knew anything about burning fat. And I found one. Bodybuilders. Bodybuilders are very interesting because they're not interested in losing weight. But they are fanatics about losing fat because fat hides the definition of their muscles. To look ripped, they have to build the muscle, but that's not enough. They also have to burn off their fat. And when I dug deeper into the bodybuilding world, I discovered something that bodybuilders were doing to burn fat every day, literally every day. And to my relief, what they were doing to burn fat naturally proved to be a very safe technique. It did not involve any supplements or meds or miracle foods. This strategy they adopted has turned my world upside down. It was the key to draining the insulin from my system and keeping it drained. It was the key to rebuilding my sensitivity to insulin, or the other side of the same coin, it was the key to chipping away at my insulin resistance. And this thing that they were doing, it actually came with a whole host of other health benefits. Later, I was to reap the rewards of every one of those, like low cholesterol, low blood pressure, greatly reduced inflammation in joints and tendons, reduced odds of developing Alzheimer's, arguably reduced odds of developing cancer, and more. Then the third game changer. While initially I didn't really change the components of my diet very much, I discovered a diet I'd never even heard of before. Now today it's growing in popularity, and no, I don't mean paleo, by the way. But that diet, that new diet, meant I didn't create sugar spikes and I didn't create insulin spikes. So it complemented the second game-changing tactic beautifully. And eventually, not initially, but eventually I shifted towards it. Initially, when I looked at it, it was just too hard for me to consider at that time. And I was into easy, not hard, especially at the beginning of my journey. But now, I'd found something that drained my insulin, and I'd found something that kept it low. What I had to do was put one more element into place, which is how to make a start on this strategy in such a way that I was never hungry, because being hungry had always been my deal breaker in everything I had done for 30 years. Well, it turned out that these game changers could be achieved without being hungry. Now, I didn't have to take that on faith. There was a way to get started that made it very easy to do. I could slowly dip my toe into the program. It didn't need any leap of faith. I didn't have to take a plunge into the deep end, and I could always take a step back if I needed to, and it was okay to do that. So now it was game on. I developed my plan. It was actually very, very simple. And then I followed the plan, and the results were type 2 diabetes eliminated, 120 pounds dropped, and my blood pressure today is 100/70. I'm an ordinary guy, but I recorded extraordinary results. I asked my family doctor, I said, in your 35 years of practice, just how many other people have you known who've achieved what I just did? And his answer was none. None. And he's a really good doctor, incidentally. He has earned the trust of my family time after time over 3 decades. So there you have it. What I did was unconventional. it had to deal with a 62-year-old guy who'd been morbidly obese at 300 pounds or more for 30 years and really wasn't all that active. And I achieved what almost no one else has. Okay. Look, if you've enjoyed this video, if you got some value out of it, please do me a favor. Do 3 things for me. First, consider subscribing to my channel. Just click on that bright red subscribe button underneath the video. I'm going to be publishing a lot of videos in the weeks to come, and you'll be notified first when I do. Second, as I said, what I did was unconventional, but it was very thoroughly thought out, and it was 100% backed by science. I documented everything I did as a detailed case study. I go into all the criteria I used, all the 12 pieces of the puzzle in great detail. I also explain the plan I came up with, of course. And of course, I cover the results. If you want to learn more, if you want to learn exactly what I did to achieve my results, visit this specific page on a website that I share with my daughter. It's fuelupshapeup.com/diabetesgone-3BT. The 3BT is 3 boxes ticked. It's a brand name I'm using when I release my case study. You don't have to remember that URL, by the way, because there's also a link to that specific page that you should visit in the description below this video. Oh, plus, I've included a link in the description that I promised from an earlier video. I promised a link to a page where there's a video of a doctor presenting a TEDx talk and absolutely shredding the American Diabetes Association for giving advice that blocks the reversal of type 2 diabetes and in fact makes the condition worse. It's really worth watching. Okay, finally here, I want to turn this over to you. Let me know in a comment, when do you think the last time was that you had no glucose and only a minimal amount of insulin floating in your system to open the door to fat burning? What were the circumstances that existed the last time you remember that happening, if it's ever happened? I'm really interested in knowing, so please leave me a comment with your feedback on it. Thanks.